Hello, this is my Clausing 8540, and this is my dog down here making sure I'm doing a good job, I guess. But I had a problem with this thing when I bought it, and that is all this stuff here was missing. It's the oiler for the spindle bearings. The person I purchased this from bought it in the early 90s, and he just put it in storage. He never used it. I don't think he had three-phase. It didn't look like to me when I was in his shop getting it out of there that he did. But he purchased it in the early 90s from a school, and it's hard to tell how long the school had it without running it. But somewhere along the line, I'm kind of assuming that it was either when it was put in storage at school or when him moving it probably busted this off. I'm thinking it was probably him. Well, probably they must have unscrewed all this, threw it on the workbench with the intention of fixing it, and never fixed it. So all the parts was missing, so I had to recreate all this. All I had to go on was a couple drawings in here. One was the oil chart, tells you what all the oil, and we're working right here, D3. Well, when I read D3, use SAE number 20 oil, fill to overflow hole in oiler. Overflow hole in oiler kind of threw me for a loop. Then I also went to the parts breakdown, which you'll see it right here. And of course, then it started making a little bit more sense of what I needed to go in there. I couldn't match this exactly because I was unable to make this piece. I couldn't cut the OD threads. Obviously, I could tap the ID, but I couldn't tap the OD. I don't have a die for that, and I can't cut threads on my lathe at an angle because I have no taper attachment, which I've been trying to find for 3 years. But anyways, pipe tap threads, that is. That's what I needed. So what I actually came up with was, you can see in here, I have a double quarter pipe tap nipple in there that is 1.5 inches long. Yeah, actually I think I got about 1.9 inches when I measured it. Right here. And then I have a double female right here that's about 1.1 inches long. You can see it right at the tip of the depth gauge here, just barely. And then, of course, that's screwed into it. Now, I turned this down to fit in this hole to 5/8 of an inch. I don't think I could have went much more without breaking through to the threads. You also see a notch here. I took an 1/8 inch end mill and milled a notch in it just to help if I ever have to get it out. If I unscrew this part and that part remains, I can stick that in there and get that out. And of course, if the third part remains, it's 3 pieces in here. I can stick an easy out inside the hole and unscrew that, which I probably could have did here too. I didn't think about it after I made it, but I was just being overly cautious. Now you'll see this thing has a hole in it. What I had to do is I did this in several steps. The first thing I did was took this off, this cap here, 4 bolts. Because first thing I wanted to see is it a sealed bearing or is it an open bearing? So I thought, well, maybe they put a sealed bearing in it and just removed that. So I pulled it off and it's a open bearing. It's actually a roller bearing in there, open roller bearing. So I was like, okay, we have to have that. So then I did some investigating. I got the machine perfectly level. And I want to emphasize this. I've seen people saying it doesn't matter if a mill's level, they're stiff and all this other stuff. Well, this might be the one mill that actually does matter because you'll see here in a little bit, there's like hardly any oil that's in the reservoir. It's not a big reservoir that goes back through there. Maybe a tablespoon, I don't know. There's not much at all. So if you happen to have this thing leaning this way, you're going to think you have oil in it, but your spindle's not going to be getting any oil because your oil depth is somewhere around 300 thousandths deep. So it wouldn't take much of a lean, I don't think, to deprive your spindle bearings of oil. But I took that off to investigate. And another thing I did is, if I can find my something straight, caliper, here we go. I took a level after the machine was leveled. I laid up against the bottom of here because that's where the oil leaks out, the bottom of here when you overfill it, right where the tip of the screwdriver is. And I sighted a straight, perfectly level line over here, and then I went around the corner. And if you see in between the vice grips here, you'll see that scribe mark right at the tip of the screwdriver. That's where that line falls. And then you'll see a black line there. That's where it falls. And of course you can see that's where my hole is. But what I did, because it actually took me about 3 weeks to do this, is the hole wasn't in there. I put this hole in there. I simply filled the thing up till I was sure it was above the point where it was leaking, basically till it leaked. And then I left it set for weeks, 3 weeks actually. And now last 6 days ago, I come down here and I cleaned this off. And now 6 days later, there's absolutely no oil leaking out from underneath of it. So now it's equalized. The oil level that's down inside of this oil cup is the maximum level it can be without leaking. It wasn't a big deal to me at first that it was leaking out there once I figured out why it was leaking, just because I was overfilling it. And I was like, well, it's not flinging it, because I turned the spindle on fastest speed. It wasn't flinging it around, so as long as it wasn't flinging it, I didn't really care, because it's all going to the catch tray anyways. And that's where all your whey lube winds up and any other oil that comes off of it. But then it had dawned on me that if it's leaking here, it's also leaking here. This is a separate compartment. This is 140 weight oil. Goes clear down into here somewhere, I think. Clear up. I think the oil level, though, is only like somewhere in here. There's 2 screws in the bolt back. Somewhere in here, I think, is the oil. About 2 inches of oil or something. 1.5 inches. But if it was leaking there, it's the same setup inside of here that it is out there, minus the cap. I don't think there's no cap in there. So you're getting the thinner oil in your 140 weight oil here, and it could, I guess, conceivably fill it up to a point it might start leaking somewhere. I don't know where. I'm not really extremely familiar in here. I haven't been in here yet. So I don't know if there's somewhere it gets to a certain point it can start leaking out, getting on the belts or something. So I didn't want that. Although, if you think about it, there might be a tablespoon of oil in here. So it might, if you overfill this every month, it might take a decade, 2 or 3 decades before that actually gets to the point to cause a problem. But I still didn't like the idea of it leaking back there. I wanted it right, so what I did is I let it equalize, and then, now that it's equalized, I just come down here and put a pair of vice grips on there to hold that open for me. I took a set of calipers, and I started out, I don't know, I think 1/4 inch, but I'm not going to do that again because it took forever. But I kept going up in like 10,000 increments. But I got somewhere around 5 something or another. I just simply do this. Now remember, there's oil in there. And then I just would touch it on the piece of pink paper. Seemed to work really good. And then I'd move it again, and then move it again. And when I got to 540 is when I think I struck oil. And there you can see we got oil now. And that showed me where to drill the hole. Sorry. Now, with the machine perfectly level, if I fill it up, if I overfill it, it's just going to run out this hole, drain it rather quickly, rather than leaking back into here for weeks. Oh, and to give you fellas, show you fellas how much oil is actually in there, since I got this caliper set to where the oil level is from the top down, if you look at this, if you fellas can see, there you can see, there's not much oil in there at all. Any more than to the bottom of the caliper here, the depth part, it starts leaking. And if you notice, I got my hole a little high. I did that on purpose because I just didn't like drilling the hole down that low for some reason. So I drilled it up just a hair high, and I'll just simply eyeball it. I won't fill it up till it runs out the hole. I'll just fill it up till it's just slightly below it. Which also works out, it's probably going to be hard for you fellas to see, but with this particular Gits fitting, the cross hole that heads that way, pretty much as long as I keep it submerged with oil, then I know I got oil into my spindle bearings. So anyways, I just figured I'd share that with you fellas, and maybe someday somebody will come across it and they'll kind of know what they got to do. It's going to take probably some time to figure it out, because the way the castings are and everything on these machines, I can't really give you a measurement and say, you need your oil level to be here, because these, even from the top down, just because it's 540 from top down on my fitting, doesn't mean it's going to be on yours. So you'll just have to basically overfill it and let it leak out. Take this off, clean everything up, make sure that it can leak out, get all the rust and grime and build up off of it. Put it back on, see what, and then fill it up, and then it'll start leaking here. And then just give it a few weeks till it finally stops leaking. And then you'll be able to take a measurement down and know where to punch your cross hole. Which basically I'm just using the cross hole as a visual sight down in there when I fill it up. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope this kind of helped you out a little bit.